You're a parent, a grandparent, aunt, or uncle. If you're concerned about our children's safety, you'll want to hear this next story. We are seeing a startling spike in threats and violence in schools across America. One county in Florida had received more than 800 school shooting threats just in the past 2 months alone. Many states are dealing with this: Iowa, Texas, Florida, South Dakota, Tennessee. Now, nearly all these threats are fake, but they're stretching police resources thin and causing unnecessary trauma to our kids. Ken Yuers joins us now. He's a teacher who has survived a school shooting, and he's also a former law enforcement official. Ken, thanks so much for being here. So, case in point, your school district dealt with a school shooting threat just last week. So let's start with the psychological impact of these threats and the school lockdowns that happen. How do you and your students deal with this? How did you live through an actual school shooting and a false threat?
Yeah, so thank you for having me, Lonnie. So it is challenging as an educator. We're here to educate children, and to be in these situations where we have to deal with potential violence, it's very difficult. When it happened in my district, before the date even started, I have students asking me, "Hey, what's going on?" And so but how we handle it is we follow the protocols, and we notify law enforcement, of course, and we follow what their advice is. As for me, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
As far as, just following district protocols is the main thing. Usually it's the older kids that know about these internet threats, if it's a hoax. And so they have concern for their younger siblings. If it's at the middle school, they're concerned of what's going on at the elementary level. But I just try to limit the amount of information that the kids need to know. It's a need-to-know basis, so we can focus on the learning. Because most of this is going to be a hoax. But of course, we do take it serious.
Well, there's got to be some psychological impact, even when you try to keep, as much away from them as possible. For yourself and for them, can you describe for us what that's like?
Yes, for myself, after going through a shooting, it does raise the anxiety level. But as an educator, you have to fall back and being a professional and being there for the kids. It depends on the child and how they handle it, but they do get anxiety because they know we live in a world, sadly, where these kind of things do happen, whether it's a hoax or, God forbid, something more serious is an actual real threat.
It's such a sad reality of today that kids have actual fear about going to school, of all the places they should feel safe. What advice do you give to your students and to their parents about how to deal with that fear?
Well, the best thing I can say is any information you know is to share it with us, because a lot of them are on social media and they know more than the adults do. And then we communicate with the parents whenever these kind of situations happen. The superintendent will send out a message to all the families, keeping them informed of what's going on to try to keep the anxiety low. And we acknowledge as professionals to these students and families that there is going to be anxiety. We understand that. And that's why law enforcement needs to be involved. They'll be patrolling the school area, making their presence known, even if they know it's a hoax, just to try to help calm nerves.
Ken, let's take a look at these numbers. Since the deadly shooting at Appalachia High School in Georgia just last month, more than 700 children and teenagers have been arrested and accused of making violent threats against schools in at least 45 states. Now, that's according to the New York Times. Clearly, something has to be done to deter this behavior. Some schools are taking a zero-tolerance policy on these threats, giving an automatic 1-year suspension from school. But then there are critics that say there should be a threat assessment done first to determine just how serious the threat is. Ken, you have law enforcement background as well as being a teacher. Are we at the point where we need this zero tolerance on these threats?
Yes, if it's a hoax, a year seems reasonable to me in suspension. If it's a real threat, then expulsion, and the district attorney needs to figure out what to do with this child and get them the services they need to try to rehabilitate them, because we live in an era where kids are on the internet all the time and they seem to think that they get a dopamine hit whenever they're getting attention. So I think that's part of what the hoax problem is. But the ones who are serious with their threats, seeking out violence, this needs to be turned over to law enforcement, and they need to be removed from the school system.
You make an interesting point about that attention. There is a sheriff in Florida right now who released the name and mugshot of an 11-year-old who was charged with a felony for allegedly making a written threat of a mass shooting. That sheriff also released a video of the child being arrested and perp walked into the station. Do you think this is a good idea? You know, this kind of stuff, once it gets on the internet, it's there for their entire lives.
Yes, and I respect what the sheriff did there in Florida. I understand his frustration, a lot of money, time, and effort. However, an 11-year-old, especially since they've only been charged, they haven't even been found guilty. I think we need to give that young person a chance to be rehabilitated and keep their privacy intact.
Those are great points.
But I do understand where the sheriff's coming from, yeah.
Yeah, clearly. I mean, this escalation of threats is a trend that we need to be addressing now. It's just a matter of how to do it. That discussion needs to go on. Ken Yuers, thanks so much for joining us and sharing your experiences with us.
And you are looking live, where we are just moments away from hearing from Vice President Kamala Harris as she speaks from the border for the first time as the Democratic nominee. But with less than 40 days to go until